Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. Hey folks, welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities. I am your host, John Brackett. So hey, I have a great guest, someone local here in San Diego, Andrew Greer, someone that I've talked to in the past and that we run into each other every now and again, but someone who's building a great reputation here in San Diego in the development space. So considering where we are right now in not only with a shortage in supply in our particular market, but also with COVID, I'm really excited to get into the discussion because this is someone who's been able to navigate his way through various market cycles, and I think he's built out a really good niche for himself. So I am going to invite him into the conversation and invite you in as well. So Andrew Greer, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Excited to be here to go over this stuff. I love real estate investing.
Awesome. So I'm going to give our audience your background. I know who you are, but I want them to know who you are as well. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about your background. So you completed a degree at San Diego State in economics, of course, one of the greatest universities in the entire world. Mm-hmm. Slightly biased, right? Slightly biased, another fellow Aztec. And then you also began your career in finance, focused on private equity in 2009, 2011. So in early 2011, you directed your focus to becoming an asset manager versus a salesperson. So we're going to talk about that. So starting in 2011, you partnered up with, looks like a colleague, his name is Keith, and you folks joined forces. And the idea there really was to start buying product that was being underutilized, right? So you're looking for a product with a higher and better use relative to how it was being used today. And then you started repositioning that for disposition. So, you started really focusing on zoning over the last couple of years in city planning because your aspiration is to start doing bigger and better projects. But I also know you have a passion for building out great communities, which is why you're on this show. So, man, welcome to the show. And, can't wait to get into it.
Yeah. No, it's love building just communities. We have some good garden communities we're building right now. We have our pocket communities that we like to build out. And then, some of our high density stuff is really unique too. But yeah, love it. Love building, love finding those little niches, those lots that work out really well and turning them into something worthwhile in the community.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about one of the comments that you mentioned earlier. Then we're going to get into, zoning and building and high density and some of the great things that are going on in San Diego, okay? So you mentioned that you started shifting your energy from being a salesperson to an asset manager. And I have some great stories about that. Yeah, but I want to hear your perspective. I think it's a really good transition. But why did you do that?
Yeah, so I was working in finance. So I was selling primarily private investments, and some of those investments don't work. They don't come together. And I was the salesperson. So I wasn't actually in control of it, didn't have my hands on the steering wheel. I was just taking the information we had, going to the next level, showing people what the opportunity was so they could invest in it and going from there. And after seeing certain products not work, other products work great, I really decided, I want to be the one that's in charge of the success of the asset, whatever it may be. Right. And to me, the fastest way to get into that was going after real assets, stuff you could walk up to and kick. And it would still be there. If somebody comes and invests, the building's going to be there in the future. There's, it's not going to be some crazy tech idea. Right. Or we did a lot of oral mapping for teeth and stuff. We sold a ton of that space, and that wasn't anything real you could touch. Right. So I wanted to get into something you could touch, feel, put trust deeds against, and invest in that way.
Yeah, I really appreciate the comment, right? One of the things my dad used to tell me, he goes, look, if you want to build wealth, you either have to get really, really good at selling a vision, okay, or you have to get really, really good at managing assets. So I decided to do both. But great observation, right? It's like, look, if you spend more time selling and you don't know how to manage and build wealth, you're almost spinning your wheels, right? And you're defeating the purpose of what this business is all about. So I'm going to shift and start getting into that, right? Because, one of the common themes that I hear, or when people reach out to us, one of the things that I hear, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but most people, it's really interesting, right? When they ask about partnerships or sponsorships, there's very little discussion around how that person has built wealth, or even if they have at all. And I find that really fascinating, because when you and I go to a bank and we get a loan, first thing the bank wants to do is they want to understand our character, right? So they pull our credit. Then they want to look at a personal financial statement to figure out what our net worth is, right? But it's really interesting to me that we're in a space that's growing, a lot more demand today for private equity, but that's not discussed as much. So I'm going to transition so we can talk about the wealth building opportunities that you see here in this space. Okay. So talk a little bit about what's going on in San Diego, maybe macroeconomics, microeconomic snapshot, considering the shortage of supply that we have here, the pressure that's on the city right now, and what they're doing to create more development opportunity, right?
Yeah, so we are 58,000 units underutilized right now. That's how far behind we are as of essentially beginning of this year. And that is obviously creating a huge amount of demand because we have very low supply. So we've had the transit priority changes through the SD housing initiative, which basically allowed on transit corridors the ability to do 100% density increases, reduce parking, and utilize the actual transportation. I focus very heavily in that space. And then additionally, along with that, we've had a couple of new zonings. CN 1-4 is popping up a lot. It's basically street walkable neighborhood with mixed use. We're going to see it's a lot more North Parks is what I would call it.
Sure.
Popping up all over town, a lot in southeastern San Diego, which is where I spend a lot of my time on development. And we're really focusing around getting to those pedestrian-based communities for building out projects and getting that density bonus, opportunity that we are currently in is we bought 3 duplexes, so 6 units. With all the zoning changes, we're actually putting 26 units on that property.
Interesting.
Big time density improvements.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's where the value is created in the zoning, right? So the ability to be able to understand what that zoning allows gives you an advantage, right? When you're looking to acquire something. And of course, sounds like you've kind of selected some areas that you spent a lot of time in, and so you know those areas really well, right? So let's talk a little bit about the high transit priority zones in San Diego, because with that comes some very unique opportunities, right? And that gives us the ability to be able to increase density and have a little bit more negotiating room in terms of how we do that, right? How we prioritize the ability to do that. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that, we're in on some projects where we have that ability, and these are larger projects. I love the concept, love the flexibility that the city is creating. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I know that's going to be something big, not only now, but moving forward.
Yeah, so I'll talk on the 2 biggest parts of the transit priority code that came out. The biggest is that you can actually do zero parking, and that runs into a lot of walls with local neighborhood individuals, NIMBYs. And then additionally, the 100% density bonus if you stay within micro unit range, which is an average of 600 square feet, maximum of 800 square feet throughout a project. So they're giving you huge amounts of leeway on how you actually build it out. Now, like for us on the parking, we still do parking. But the difference is when I'm building studios, 1 bedrooms, I might only do 1 spot, where I might have been previously required to do 1.5 to 2 spots for those units, depending upon what corridor they were in and how they were built out. In the parking itself on a lot of these lots, I just I can't get that many spots.
Sure.
Without going subterranean. As soon as I go subterranean, now I'm spending big bucks to make it work, or I'm doing lifts. If I'm doing lifts, I'm adding something to my balance sheet that's going to affect my NOI over time because I'm now servicing lifts, and I'm putting that money up front, which we're really cognizant on what's going to affect our NOI in the future when we build. We rather spend more money early and less money in maintenance later, just because as we season the buildings, hold them, disposition them, good solid assets that an investor can come into later when we want to sell that have low expenses are going to be more appealing to that buyer. So I like to spend that money up front when it's cheaper because it's going into my original cost versus my trailing 24.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about parking, right? Because in San Diego, or really in any high density market, whether it be LA, San Diego, any high density market, San Francisco, parking, people are willing to pay a premium for parking, right? Because no one wants to come home from work and have to spend an hour looking for parking. And I used to have to do this when I was in college, right? Yeah. I used to have to do that, man. Spend literally 45 minutes looking for parking, okay? And the days that I didn't feel like spending an hour searching for parking, I would park, next day get a ticket, right? So I understand the value of parking, especially when it comes to commercial real estate. Okay, there's a lot of value that gets added there. And it's also a way to differentiate your projects, especially in high density neighborhoods, right? So how do you strike that balance, okay, with some of the flexibility that's afforded us right now in the zoning allowances between parking and then also micro units, right? How do you strike that balance? What do you look for? So say, for example, the ratio is one parking space for every unit. Okay. But you can optimize, increase your density. Okay. Say you could double your density, right? So obviously parking is going to get impacted there, but where's the sweet spot for you? I know there's it's kind of a catch-22 question, right? Because we're not mapping all this stuff out, but for the sake of conversation, because I know it's a valuable conversation, it's something that should be considered, especially in our market, right? So how do you think through that process?
So we really focus on what community we're going into, also what our unit mix is. So I have a building in National City that's coming online. It's going to be, we're starting rent up next week. That one has 2 spots per every unit because we have multi-generational living in that complex. That's what it was designed for. My other ones, we end up down in more, I'd call them more metro areas. We have 1 parking spot per unit, but we also are in areas that currently are going to have street parking available. I right now don't go into I don't want to go fight over being on 30th Street in North Park, super ultra premium location with the highest possible rents. I like to be B to B plus rental areas. That's our sweet spot. We'll even do B minus. And we're looking to not be like the epicenter. That also allows us to do a different amenity mix to make rents work, but not have higher expenses and play off that crowd. And I also do a ton of military in a lot of our units. So
when you say ton of military, what does that mean?
So a lot of our projects being in Southeastern are close to the base right there on the bay.
Sure.
And then also going over to Coronado. So I have a lot of military guys and gals that like to rent from us. And a lot of times, they're underway a lot. I have a lot of guys that are gone 2 weeks a month while their ship is out. They're not worried about their cars. They're leaving them on base. I'm also putting them into our studios and our 1 bedrooms. And it's working out well in that way. So I'm not looking for the ultra premium, I want to pay $3,800 for a 2-bedroom. I'm looking for what's nice, neat, clean, taken care of, but I can get it for $1,800.
Gotcha.
And that's where we play.
Okay. So how how is your underwriting changing in this market, right? So what are some of the things that you're paying special attention to considering the changes that are happening right now in our marketplace and the changes that are going to continue to happen likely over the next 24 months?
Yeah, so we've underwritten for higher interest rates on construction. We're just assuming that some of our projects are going to have higher, more expensive money, completely contrary to what's going on right now. We expect that the pendulum will swing back the other way. We're also seeing currently plumbing go up. We've seen about a 20% increase in materials on plumbing, which has been really dramatic. And we've seen about a 5% increase on wood and roofing supplies right now.
So on the plumbing, are you talking about copper or just plumbing?
What fixtures? Really? Like heaters. We have one building has a big boiler coming in, and it went up by 20% because there's just not that many of them coming over anymore. Our HVAC
supply issue.
Yeah, it's a big supply issue for us right now. So we did a redesign, which obviously we tie in Title 24. So then we ended up tying in and redoing all of our HVAC systems to a different supplier. So that way we could make that all work. And we were able to finagle things, and it only cost a couple $1,000s extra. But it required us to move in that direction. And now we've looked at with all of our other projects, moving them in the direction of the same suppliers and actually acquiring those units early. So that way we could avoid those costs later.
When you say acquiring those units early, what do you mean? I don't think.
Boilers for some of our
acquiring the product early. I got it. It makes sense. You're getting a discount. Yeah, you're prepaying for the product to get a discount. Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense.
Then we just dial it in with the Title 24 early on instead of doing the switch later.
Okay. So it sounds like where you're really making most of the adjustments is really in the cost of construction.
Yeah.
Right? And then how you're negotiating with your vendors and how you're improving the relationship with your vendors to be able to capture greater discounts on the front end, right? For your material cost. Okay, great. So it makes a lot of sense. And that's smart business, man. That's really smart business. Of course you do that. You're from San Diego State University. I would expect that from you. So hey man, so I'm going to pivot a little bit, okay, and talk a little bit about, so we talked about underwriting to construction costs, but I think construction costs is going to be a really big discussion over the next 24 months. It is right now, especially when, if things start to shake out like most people are starting to have conversations about, right? Because the biggest folks that are going to be impacted there really are banks, right? Banks and of course operators, but equity goes away, bank takes a hit, and of course banks have to reach out to folks like you and say, hey, I need you to be able to accurately estimate this cost because we have to finish this product or this project in order for us to either lease it up or to liquidate it, right? To be able to get our money back. So there are two viewpoints, right? One viewpoint is that construction costs are coming down, which is contrary to what you just discussed. The other is that construction costs are going to remain stable, especially in high density markets, right? Now, there are two components of construction costs. There's labor and material. So can you touch on that a little bit? Because one of the things that we're trying to do right now, so we have projects right now that we're actually moving through the planning process. Some are large, some are small. And the logic is that now's a great time. I'm a big believer that you have to go in the opposite direction of the masses, right? People stop building, I build, or at least I move product through to get ready to build for the anticipating lower cost. So can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what your viewpoint is there?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be interesting because what I saw when this all happened was everybody that had anything that was within striking distance, let's say, they jumped on it and they pushed it through because they want to get it out to market.
Right.
Other stuff that was more in conceptual or design phase or prelim phase, it got pushed to the side until people understand where their cash flows are at. And I can say for myself, we actually took 99 units offline. So they're already in income producing property, or we just had the contracts on them. And we decided, hey, let's sit back on these. Everything that's at the front of the line, let's push it all through right now. Okay. So I think that has definitely driven some of the construction cost right now. Is a lot of people are like, oh man, the time is now. Like, we got to go now. Because there's a lot of building going on right now. There's a lot of guys building. But I don't see a lot of guys moving on projects. So projects coming up, stuff, people going after bigger stuff, guys picking up. I play in like the infill space, less than an acre infill development. So we're usually between 10 to 30 units. I haven't seen a lot of trading going on in there. There is some coming up because, we're in the mix on a couple of projects right now that people are starting to show their faces, and we're kind of like, no, get out of here. We're going to buy it. So it'll be interesting. I could see the building dropping off. And maybe labor going down.
Why do you say maybe? Just out of curiosity, because if there's no demand,
I feel like it lags sometimes.
Of course.
And also in the infill space, a lot of the guys that are playing in that space also play in the residential space. And there's a lot of residential cash out there being spent right now. So it's putting a squeeze on us too. People doing upgrades, kitchens, additions, stuff like that, where these guys are pulling part of their crews to go do some of that stuff. And, the lucrative retail stuff where they're charging way more than they can get away with charging us. If they go take on 5 of those instead of taking on one of our projects, all of a sudden it makes sense to them. Because that retail person is coming to them and they're like, well, hey man, I can go do kitchens at a premium and build out, 500 square foot additions or ADUs. And I don't have to deal with you.
Yeah. Well, in these markets, relationships are really important, right? But not just relationships with your vendors, but also it's how you treated them when times are really bad.
Yeah.
And if you're that company that paid people in those bad times, I think people know you as someone that's going to perform and pay, right? And so those relationships tend to be a lot more loyal, especially when you remind them that, hey, we're in a cycle, which I've had to do, and things are likely not going to look this good over the next 24 months. So we need to start talking through how we're going to approach this market, right? So it sounds like you're having those discussions, right? Or maybe you're having those discussions or you're thinking about them. But based on what you told me, what you're seeing right now is there's a lot of product being pushed through because that product is in process, right? Construction in progress. So everybody's pushing through to create finished product. And, the other side of that too is not a lot of new stuff coming to market because it sounds like, you have a lot of people waiting on the sidelines trying to figure out what to make of where we are right now over the next 24 months. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yep.
Okay, 100%. Cool. So now let's talk about how do you manage your downside risk, right? So we understand that, and this is what I love about markets, right? And you described the market perfectly. Okay. No one's in agreement, right? You have some folks thinking that there's a great opportunity. You have other folks waiting on the sideline, and that's have a market, because if everybody agreed, there would be no opportunity, right? You couldn't do anything. But fortunately, that's not the case, right? Everybody looks at things a little bit differently. So from your standpoint, how are you guys, how are you bracing yourself for, say, a worst case scenario? Mm-hmm. Okay, what is the plan there for a worst case scenario? And then we'll talk a little bit about best case scenario, right?
Yeah, so on a lot of our projects, they produce income before we actually build them. So like the 6 duplexes, they produced a good amount of income. And we actually had them in a good place loan-wise prior to all of this. some of our other projects, we actually went out, got conventional loans on them because they are income producing. We took a little bit of risk in the sense that we put more of our own money in it, took out some of the hedge fund money that we had invested with, and went straight conventional. So that way we're like, hey, this is going to make, it might only make $2,500 a month, but it makes $2,500 a month. Sure. It's not costing us anything.
Sure.
We have solid rentals in here. We do a lot of Airbnb in our stuff before we tear it down. We switched a big portion of our
fascinating,
portfolio
man. That's
over.
fascinating.
Yeah, it's love that strategy, by the way.
Well, talk about that because, I don't, we've made a decision not to enter into that space. I always thought it was a little bit too risky, but I know a lot of people have a lot of success with that. And I think the other side of that too, though, is just haven't committed the time to really researching that and figure out how to win in that space. But I just never really wanted to get into short-term rentals, right? So can you talk a little bit of why is that so good and why does it work so well for you? I'm just really kind of fascinated by that.
So we're urban areas close to downtown, right. Most of our projects, or some coastal stuff that we have too in Point Loma. And it's usually, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom max, easy to rent up. We're not party house Airbnb. We're not bottom of the basket Airbnb. Right. We're right there in that easy range where it's cheaper than a hotel and people rent all the time, literally all the time. So our biggest key to our success is we have a fantastic cleaning crew. We overpay them. They're managed by a separate individual that started the company just to service our Airbnbs.
Right.
And we pay probably, I'm going to say $25 more per cleaning, which is a huge amount of money. But outside of that, I have the whole system automated, and it's automated messages, automated locks. They're all tied into a system. They all upload themselves, give the guests their code, all of that. Everything is just dialed in to a super clean system with every single question they could have answered, and just we go from there and we just rent them out like crazy.
Okay, good. So that's how you make it work, right? Is you've automated the process and you built out really good checklists that you've converted into systems, and that's how you do it. You automate everything, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What system do you use? We use something called Process Street to create the automation.
So we do all of it in Airbnb itself.
Oh, you use their product. They have
their product.
They have a product inside of that.
So you can use all of their queues to save all the emails. We use all of their digital books, and this is a big part of it too. Is if you use everything they have there, they know that the guests are going to have a good experience because you've checked off every checkbox in the algorithm.
Got it.
And then we reached out. We're like, hey, what automated lock company do you recommend? They recommended August Locks. We just tied into August Lock. When somebody does their sets their time, the August Lock already logs it automatically, knows when they're coming, sets a code just for their stay. And then we have manual automation stuff too. Like we have 2 hidden lock boxes on every property. So if they ever get locked out, lose a key, anything like that, we have it set up. We have a handyman that does a lot of work for us that lives next to 6 of our Airbnbs, literally 2 doors down.
Smart.
And so he is our, I have this problem. He does all of it. And we've been able to, from our projects, just on getting handyman stuff done on projects that we own currently, and through the Airbnbs, to keep him constantly busy. And he takes care of us really well for that. But yeah, really just using their systems, dialing it in. I did a lot of reading on what would make Airbnbs pop. And, I have a brick wall like that in one of our units. Looks awesome.
I love my brick wall, man.
Yeah, I love
my brick wall.
I think they pop in photos. So we did that. And what it does too is a lot of times me and my partner will actually buy the assets up front, go through the prelim process. We'll actually set up the Airbnb, start renting them, start making money, go through the process of getting the prelim done on the property so we know exactly what we can build, spend a certain amount of money on architecture, structural, soils, get all of that there, have the package together, then go out to investors.
Smart.
So that allows us then to show them more cash coming in on a monthly basis up front.
Sure.
We've shown what we can do with what the asset was and what it is now. And then we're just taking that story a little bit further and extracting a little bit either better percentage for us as general partners or a little bit higher upside on what we're selling the asset to the investment for.
Okay, so what is the delta, man, the premium between Airbnb and the rental market here in San Diego? Because that's, I think, the big question, right? Because if they're, all things being equal, relatively the same, I would choose to have long-term renters in that space. But what is is it pretty significant? Is it 100%? Is
We're
it 30%?
probably going to average about 275 to 300% over.
Really?
So the big thing is
per room, or is it per unit?
Per unit. And that's going to be, we're going to make the most of our money June, July, August. So
Sure.
I can have units, let's say I have 3 units that average about $13,000 a month. In July, they'll hit 25 to 28,000. And then August and June, they'll hit 19 to 20,000. Obviously that didn't happen this year.
Right.
That's just the anomaly, but we were at 94% occupancy still. So I just didn't have Comic-Con, I didn't have Pride, and I didn't have 4th of July.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand this, okay? Because this was the big question for me, and I didn't think, because all the preliminary stuff that I did, and we just closed on something about 4 weeks ago, and I looked at Airbnb, and I looked at it because I read their book, right? I read their book, and they make some comments in there that I go, you know what, this is actually kind of fascinating. But I was more interested from the viewpoint of building, because one of the things that they're looking to do is they're looking now to partner with builders, right? And so I think a lot of people are kind of seeing the writing on the wall there. So, but man, when I did the math, for me, like a 20% delta just wasn't enough to warrant getting into that space, right? So I'm like, we're not doing that. But you're saying it's a 300% delta. Okay.
And it's got to be at least a 250% delta to make
pretty
it
huge. So even when you net out your operating cost, if you net out your operating cost there, are you still? Are you 2 times still?
We're over 2 times. Yeah, because I'm doing that like
kind of fascinating to me.
A big thing for us is that cleaning, because that $25 extra is probably saving me $150 a day in management.
Interesting.
So, it was a point of contention when we were setting it up because it was so expensive. But then when we looked at it and went through the process, and we're about 5 months into our first series of them, we were like, okay, this makes perfect sense.
Sure. Okay, good. Well, I'm going to pivot now, right? Because I didn't think that we're going to get so deeply into Airbnb.
Yeah.
But I just found it really fascinating, right? So you're saying that, man, you're able to generate roughly a 3-time premium over what those units would typically rent for with long-term renters, right? So I find that really fascinating. And I appreciate you sharing that. So I'm going to pivot right now and talk a little bit about submarkets, right? So you said that, hey, you really like some of the southeastern submarkets, and that you're looking for communities where it sounds like some walkability, I think is what you said, if I'm understanding that correctly. Yeah. But ultimately, being relatively close to downtown San Diego, I mean, that's I think where the opportunity is, right? So what submarkets do you really like here in San Diego County that you feel, may have some future potential, or at least make sense to spend time on? So if a broker called you, where would you be telling them where would you say you spend your time and energy?
Golden Hill, Sherman Heights, Logan Heights, and then National City.
Oh, Sherman Heights. Yeah. I have product in all those markets, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Why do you like Sherman Heights though? I actually own in Sherman Heights, but just from your perspective, why?
I like the proximity to downtown. I also like Imperial Avenue is going to be completely different over the next 10 years.
Agreed.
They've changed the zoning. I think it's going to turn into a little bit more like North Park down that corridor. And it's just everything's pushing that way. And it is, I like it. I think it's
I do too, man. And I own off of Imperial. And you know what's really interesting though? There are a lot of historic homes down there, homes that are designated historic. So it's going to be interesting to see even that Walmart was, and that took some time to get through. But it's going to be interesting to see how people are going to approach that, because that is definitely not the path that, that's definitely not the path of least resistance, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. But doing some of the co-housing stuff that we've seen happen in there, take the old big houses, convert the rooms into actual units. Like, there's some great product over there. And then there is some stuff that can get torn down. And there's some stuff that's, it's a 800 square foot house on a 7,000 square foot lot where you could build the density up along it. So we've actually done product where we're actually building next to, we kept 2 buildings on the lot and we're building around it. So that way we tie in the old with the new.
Sure. I like it, man. I like that. Okay. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and start talking about capitalizing projects, right? So in construction, of course, very important. Okay. Because typically you can't buy a project with all debt.
Yeah.
Usually. Okay. So now we're kind of moving through this space where you talked about people pushing projects through that are in process. And of course, being a lot more patient when it comes to buying, right? So how do you expect to capitalize projects moving forward? So you find a good project that you like, you share that, hey, every now and again, we'll just pay cash for it, right? We'll get it leased up, start generating income, and then we'll go out and we'll replace some of our capital with investor capital. So can you talk a little bit about how you're capitalizing your project? Well, really, where do you see the opportunity is moving forward between debt and equity?
Yeah, so we like to go as low debt up front when we syndicate. Just that's one of our hedges for if the market shifts. So we like to bring in more equity than most people would up front, just so if interest rates shift in a bad direction, we can still get the money out and stabilize the asset and leave equity in to get it through that next phase. I think some people play pretty tight to the razor's edge on that, and we don't like to do that. But we raise a lot of our money through networking.
Sure.
We run San Diego real estate networking. So that's been very beneficial for us.
Nice.
I run it through a lot of time. A lot of agents actually invest with us, real estate agents. And then we've built a network over our 10 years in the business, essentially, with different investors. And depending upon their appetite, we bring them in. And a lot of times we found that investors that like something like to tell their friends, and they're like, hey, check out what I'm doing. And I'm like, hey, when you tell them that, just invite me to the meeting. So I can tell them about it.
I think it's very wise. So, we're at the end of the show, man, and you've been a tremendous guest. I'm going to start wrapping up with just a couple of questions here, but I just wanted to make you aware of that. So what advice, can you give our listeners about equity financing and being a sponsor that investors admire and respect, right? Because equity, of course, is different, okay? And that is, equity has feelings, right? And it has an expectation behind that money. So being that you're sponsoring projects now and you're growing, how would you answer that for our listeners out there? So someone, if you have, right now we have quite a few operators that tune into our show. We also have quite a few limited partners, right? And then we have a few that are actually looking to get into this space. But for the most part, most of the folks that participate, listening right into the show, they're fairly experienced and they're active. So what would be some advice that you can give?
Set up communication. Have a system for communicating with your investors, with your limited partners. Whether it be quarterly, monthly, set up that expectation and then maintain it. And then additionally, when things don't go the right direction, tell them. When things go the right direction, tell them. But it's always most important when it goes the wrong direction to tell them.
Right. Right.
If anyone that always comes with good news isn't really investing. That's just what it is. I mean, stuff happens, problems happen. Your job is, as an operator, is to work through issues. If it was easy and it always turned out great, everyone would do it. Things pop up. Things happen. You have to work through them. You have to figure them out. And that means telling the story of what's going on and how you're going to fix it.
All right, great. So great segue into sharing your most challenging project and the key lessons learned, right? There are always some great home run wins. And of course, there's some projects that don't necessarily turn out as projected. So can you share, the project that didn't turn out as expected and the greatest lesson that you pulled from that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, so we bought one, and it was years ago. It was a subdivision. We were building single-family houses, and we wanted to start off by just building one and just going from there. But we had a few problems with the lot, so we decided to buy the lots around it instead and re-subdivide the whole thing. And that took me into a stormwater zone that I didn't understand at that point in time.
Right.
And it basically doubled the costs on that, which was a huge line item in our budget, and made it so that that project was very expensive and not very profitable.
Right, of course.
And a lot of work. So I've really learned from that how to dial into high density development in urban settings. I rarely buy anything over an acre. And if we're going to buy over an acre, it's going to have to be over 5. Just because we learned that sweet spot to make it work doesn't happen at the acre mark because of what happens with the stormwater requirements.
Right. You got to spread that cost, right? You got to spread that cost over more lots. Makes a lot of sense. So, Andrew, what is the one question that you'd like to ask of me that you feel would add any value to our audience? And then we're going to start wrapping this up, man.
What do you see happening over the next 24 months?
Well, so, let me qualify that question. Okay. In what area? In acquisitions, inside of financing, with management?
I would say in construction itself, like the actual construction piece.
Okay, cool. So for me, construction, I look at it a little bit differently. And so with the projects that we have in our pipeline right now, the stuff that's ground up, very similar to what you described. But I feel that in high density markets like San Diego and LA, which intuitively makes sense, right? When things start slowing down, so a good example is what you described. When we push all this product through, I don't think the demand is going to be like what it is right now. And so I think labor costs may not shift that much, but I do believe material costs are going to come down. And here's the reason for this, right? So if we look at material costs, we're looking at national and international manufacturers of that product type, right? Well, if you think about where we are today with unemployment, right? When we're in what's a better way to say this? Okay, when you think about where we are today right now with unemployment is really high, right? We started with 50 million people that were unemployed. Now we're down to, I think, 30, and now it's rising again, right? 30 million, now it's rising again. Well, that's almost 12% of what our total population here is in the United States, right? Okay, so from 2008 to 2008 to 2020, January of, okay, it took, almost 10 years for us to create 10 million jobs, to get down to a 4% unemployment rate, right? The lowest in the history of this country. I find it hard to believe, with almost 30 million people unemployed, that we are going to replace all those jobs in 2 months to 2 years. Okay, physically impossible to do, right? I mean, if we look at history, just highly unlikely, not to mention that a lot of these jobs are not going to come back. They're just not going to come back. Okay.
Yeah.
Because economically, we had many businesses that were performing marginally. And this, of course, just will take away those businesses, right? Like my buddy next door says he owns a sushi restaurant and he's third generation Japanese. He goes, John, okay, in battle, someone must die. And I'm paraphrasing politely, but he makes a good point. But it goes to show the psychology, right? Of people who are battle tested, man, who are used to dealing in grinds. And for them, they see that as an opportunity, right? So to answer your question and to kind of close this out, I really feel that construction costs are going to come down because we're going to be in a labor market where we're going to have an excess supply of labor. And, when that happens, manufacturers are in a little bit better position they have a greater talent pool to choose from. Okay. And of course, supply and demand, right? Costs will be a little bit lower because you have more people chasing fewer jobs. And I believe that's going to bring down and of course you have less people buying those products. So I feel that over the next couple of months, especially once we get through this initial push, like you talked about, we're going to have construction costs that come down. So for us, it's a great opportunity to push stuff through. Okay. Especially if they're longer projects, right? If you go through, especially in San Diego, if it's going to take you, say, 12 months to get something approved or now 14 months, hopefully by that time, it makes sense to pull permits and to build. And so that's kind of the lens that we're looking at. Now, the greatest factor there is your cost basis. So it doesn't make sense taking that risk if you're carrying a lot of cost going into that strategy, right? For us, fortunately, our projects, man, very low cost. Our basis is very low. So I'm willing to take that risk. I feel like I understand our downside risk. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I like the thought process there.
Yeah. Well, that we have a market. That's a market, man. That's a market. Yeah. Well, hey, man, you've been a tremendous guest, and of course, a very smart one because you're a graduate of San Diego State University. Okay, and it's always great, man, talking to you. I'm really glad to see that you're growing and crushing it out there, and more importantly, getting smarter in this space. And, finding ways just to embrace where we are today and to build out some great product and some great communities, right? I think inside of the space, it's very rare where we get to use real estate as a means, as an opportunity to positively impact people. So keep crushing it, man. You're doing a great job of that. How do people get a hold of you, Andrew, for, if they have questions, want to reach out to you, want to learn a little bit more about what you do? What's the best way for them to do that?
You can go to investwithandrew.com. And connect with me there, or andrewthomasgreer.com. Either one, you can go on the contact page and reach out to me. And then if you're on Instagram, a lot of people DM me all the time. I'm Realty Entrepreneur on Instagram, and I'm fairly active as far as like connecting with people on there via instant message. Beautiful. So those are probably the three easiest ways to reach me.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, man, you've been a tremendous guest. I wish you continued success. And audience, remember that, an opportunity may look different, between different people in different situations, right? But that's why we have a market, right? Not everybody agrees. So for us here, our purpose is to build out great apartment communities and to improve how people live. I think Andrew did a great job of sharing some great examples. So I am your host, John Brackett. You can subscribe. To connect with us, you can either subscribe, right? We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can link in with me, John Brackett, on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on Instagram under We Build Great Apartment Communities, and YouTube, our YouTube channel, We Build Great Apartment Communities as well. So I wish everybody an amazing one. And Andrew, I wish you continued success, man.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.